At her graduation dinner in Lagos, everyone was smiling and clapping, but not for her. While her friends were being praised, her own relatives whispered behind her back, calling her useless. Some laughed that she would never achieve anything in life, and others mocked her clothes, saying she looked poor compared to her classmates. She sat there holding back her tears, trying to smile even though her heart was breaking. She had worked so hard, studied day and night, but still, her family refused to see her worth. But that night was not going to end in shame. As the dinner finished and everyone stepped outside, their eyes froze. Right in front of the hall, shining under the streetlights, stood a brand new car. And the keys? They were in her hand. The same girl they called useless had bought it with her own effort, her own sweat, and her own determination. The laughter turned into silence, and the mocking smiles disappeared. Suddenly, all those who had insulted her were speechless. She opened the car door with pride, her eyes full of tears, but this time of victory. The sound of the engine was like music, and the look on their faces was the sweetest gift. She was no longer the useless one. They realized she was stronger, smarter, and more successful than they ever believed. That night, her car did not just carry her home. It carried her dignity, her hard work, and her sweet revenge. At her cousin's wedding in Nairobi, the atmosphere was full of joy, laughter, and music. Guests were beautifully dressed, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, except her. From the moment she entered, her own relatives looked down on her. Instead of treating her like family, they pushed her around as if she was just a helper. They told her to carry trays of food, serve drinks, and pick up empty plates. Some of the aunties whispered that she was poor and useless. Even her cousins joked loudly that she was only fit to work as a servant, not as a guest. She tried to hold back her tears, forcing a smile as she walked from table to table with heavy trays. Inside, her heart was breaking. She had dreamed of this day being filled with love and respect, but instead, she was treated with humiliation. Every laugh and every cruel word cut her deeply. Yet she remained calm, quietly telling herself that the world would soon see the truth. The wedding ended late in the evening, and as people stepped outside, something caught their eyes. Parked right at the entrance was a shining luxury car, sleek, expensive, and brand new. The guests gathered around it, whispering and pointing, wondering which rich person had arrived. Suddenly, she walked forward confidently, pulled out the keys, and unlocked the car. Gasps filled the air. The same girl they had mocked, the same girl they had treated like a servant, was the proud owner of that stunning car. Her relatives stood frozen, unable to believe their eyes. The aunties who had whispered against her now struggled to hide their shame. Her cousins who laughed at her now stared in silence, their faces pale. She smiled through tears, not out of sadness anymore, but out of victory. She knew how hard she had worked, how many nights she stayed awake fighting for her future. And now, her success was shining brighter than all their insults. When she sat inside the car and started the engine, the sound was louder than any mockery. People clapped, some even congratulated her, though their faces showed regret for their earlier words. She drove away slowly, her head held high, leaving behind a crowd full of shock and guilt. That night, she proved that dignity is not given by family's approval, but earned by strength and determination. Her humiliation turned into her sweetest triumph. In just one evening, she showed everyone that the girl they called useless was the one who had the last laugh, and the road ahead of her was brighter than ever. In Accra, the family house was filled with voices and laughter as everyone gathered for a big family meeting. But for her, it was never a place of comfort. The moment she walked in, her brothers smirked at her. They called her jobless and a burden. They mocked her clothes, saying she looked too simple, and reminded her loudly that she was still living without a proper job. Every word felt like a knife, but she stayed quiet, holding her pain deep inside. She had always been the one they looked down on, the one they thought would never achieve anything. As the meeting went on, her brothers bragged about their salaries, their businesses, and their new phones. They laughed and said she should learn from them instead of sitting idle. She wanted to speak up, but instead she kept smiling, knowing something they didn't. Her heart was beating fast, waiting for the right moment. She had worked in silence, struggled in secret, and soon her truth would be revealed. When the meeting ended, everyone began walking outside. That was when the surprise waited. Right in front of the family compound stood a shining, brand-new car. The paint sparkled in the sunlight, the tires looked fresh, and the interior was luxurious. Her brothers froze, their laughter cut short. Neighbors passing by also stopped to stare, whispering in amazement. Who in the family owned such a car? With steady steps, she walked forward, pulled the keys from her bag, and pressed the unlock button. The lights flashed, and the car beeped softly. Everyone gasped. Their jobless sister, the one they had mocked endlessly, was the proud owner of that beautiful car. Her brothers' faces turned red, their eyes wide in disbelief. Suddenly, all their pride disappeared. The room filled with silence that was louder than all their insults. She smiled, her eyes filled with tears of victory. She remembered the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the hard work she had put into her small online business that none of them took seriously. It was that very business that had given her the power to buy the car. Now, the same brothers who laughed at her stood speechless, ashamed of their words. When she sat inside and started the engine, the sound was like music. Some relatives clapped, others congratulated her warmly, but her brothers couldn't even meet her eyes. She drove away slowly, her head held high, leaving behind the bitter taste of regret in their mouths. That day in Accra, she proved that silence and hard work are stronger than mockery. She was no longer the jobless sister. They finally understood she was the one who had built her own success, and her shining car was the proof of her unstoppable strength. In Kigali, the house was decorated with balloons, music, and laughter for her sister's big birthday celebration. Family members and friends had gathered, bringing shiny gift bags, wrapped boxes, and expensive perfume. Everyone was showing off what they had brought, but when her turn came, she stood quietly with empty hands. Immediately, the whispers began. Her cousins laughed, her aunties shook their heads, and her sister frowned in disappointment. Some even mocked her openly, saying, "She couldn't even bring a simple gift? How useless." Their words stung deeply, but she kept a soft smile on her face, hiding the storm in her heart. As the party went on, people kept teasing her, comparing her to others who brought big presents. They said she was lazy, poor, and shameful. She wanted to cry, but instead she stayed calm. Only she knew the truth. Her gift was not something that could be wrapped in a shiny box. She had worked day and night in silence, building herself up while everyone thought she was failing. And now, the moment to reveal it had finally come. When the party ended and guests began walking outside, a bright light caught their eyes. Parked right in front of the gate was a brand new car, shining under the streetlight. The chrome glistened, the tires were spotless, and the car looked like it had just come out of a showroom. Everyone gasped in shock. They wondered who could have brought such a car to the party. Then, slowly, she stepped forward with a confident smile, took out the keys, and pressed the unlock button. The car beeped, and the lights flashed. The crowd fell silent. Her sister stood frozen, her mouth wide open. The same girl who was mocked for not bringing a gift had given herself the grandest gift of all, a car bought with her own hard work and determination. Her cousins, who had laughed, now looked embarrassed. The aunties who had whispered against her could not hide their shame. Guests who thought she was poor now clapped in amazement. She opened the car door and sat inside proudly, her heart racing with victory. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. She remembered all the nights she worked quietly, saving every coin, facing struggles no one ever saw. That car was not just a vehicle. It was proof of her strength, her sacrifice, and her success. When the engine roared to life, it silenced every insult. People congratulated her, some even apologized for their earlier words. She drove away slowly, her head held high, leaving behind a crowd full of regret and admiration. That night in Kigali, the girl with no gift gave herself the biggest surprise of all. She was no longer the sister they pitted. She was the sister they admired, the one who turned shame into pride and silence into the loudest victory. On a bright Sunday morning in Mombasa, the church was full of singing and joy. Families were dressed in their best clothes, greeting each other warmly. But for her, it was different. The moment she walked in, some of her relatives began to whisper and laugh. They pointed at her simple dress and shook their heads. "She has achieved nothing," one auntie said loudly enough for others to hear. Her cousins added jokes about how she was wasting her life, while her brothers rolled their eyes and called her a failure. She sat quietly in the pew, trying to focus on the sermon, but the words of her own family echoed louder than the preacher's. Her heart ached, yet she refused to let them see her pain. She bowed her head and prayed silently, asking for strength. The whole service, they continued to look down on her, as if she didn't belong. But deep inside, she knew something they didn't. She had worked hard in silence, building her own path, and soon the truth would shine brighter than their cruel words. When the service ended, everyone walked outside into the church compound. People gathered in groups, chatting and laughing. That's when the surprise appeared. Parked right outside the church gates was a sleek, brand new car that looked too fine to belong to anyone in the crowd. The paint glistened in the sunlight, the rims sparkled, and children ran around it, pointing in excitement. Her family turned to look, their eyes wide. They started asking, "Who brought this car? Which rich visitor came to church today?" Then, calmly and gracefully, she stepped forward. From her small handbag, she pulled out the car keys. With one click, the car lights flashed, and the doors unlocked. Gasps filled the air. The same woman they mocked inside the church for achieving nothing was the proud owner of that stunning car. The air went silent. Her brother's smiles faded, her cousins stopped laughing, and her aunties stood frozen in shame. Neighbors clapped and congratulated her loudly, while church members gathered around to admire the car. She smiled softly, her eyes shining with tears, not of pain but of pride. She had struggled alone, worked hard in secret, and now her success was in front of everyone to see. When she sat in the driver's seat and started the engine, the powerful sound filled the compound. The same family that had insulted her could only watch as she drove off, leaving behind their gossip and mockery. That Sunday in Mombasa, she proved that success doesn't need loud words. It speaks for itself. The girl they once called nothing showed everyone she was something greater than they ever imagined. Her car was not just a vehicle. It was her victory, her dignity, and her sweetest answer to every insult. In Johannesburg, the family gathered for a sad day, her uncle's funeral. The air was heavy with grief, but even in that moment, her relatives could not stop finding fault in her. As people contributed money for the funeral expenses, she stayed silent, and that was enough to spark whispers. And Annie frowned and said loudly, "She has nothing to give." Useless as always. Her cousins laughed, nodding in agreement, and her older brothers scolded her, asking why she could never support the family. Even in mourning, they found a way to shame her. She sat quietly, her heart breaking, not just for the loss of her uncle, but also for the cruelty of her own blood. She wanted to speak, to tell them that she had worked hard, that she was not the failure they thought she was. But she stayed silent, holding her pain deep inside. She reminded herself that the truth did not need to be shouted. It would soon reveal itself in the loudest way. After the funeral prayers ended, people began leaving the hall. The family members gathered outside, still murmuring about her failure to contribute. That was when the moment came. Parked right by the entrance was a sleek, shining car. It stood out like a diamond, its polished body reflecting the afternoon sun. Guests started pointing, whispering, "Who owns that car? It must belong to someone important." Her brothers laughed bitterly, saying it could never be hers. But then she stepped forward, calm and confident. Slowly, she reached into her bag, pulled out the keys, and with one click, the car lights flashed and the doors unlocked. The crowd gasped in shock. Their eyes widened, their mouths fell open. The same woman they mocked for not contributing was the proud owner of that luxury car. The silence was heavy. The auntie who called her useless could not lift her eyes. Her brothers, who had laughed the loudest, were now speechless. Even her cousins who had mocked her stared in disbelief. Strangers from the funeral clapped and congratulated her warmly, praising her strength. She walked to the driver's seat, her steps steady, her head held high. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of triumph. That car was not just metal and wheels. It was her years of hard work, her sleepless nights, her sacrifices that no one had ever seen. It was her dignity, shining brighter than all the insults thrown at her. When she started the engine, the sound silenced the whispers once and for all. She drove away slowly, leaving behind stunned faces and heavy regret. That day in Johannesburg, at her uncle's funeral, the girl they had shamed became the woman they admired. Her sleek car was not only a ride home, it was her victory, her respect, and her sweetest revenge. In Kampala, word spread quickly that she was finally coming back to her village after many years away. People gathered at the roadside, curious to see her. Some smiled kindly, but most whispered cruel words. "She must be returning because she failed in the city," an old neighbor said. "She left with big dreams, but look, no husband, no house, no success," another added. Even her own relatives joined in the gossip, saying she had been forgotten and poor. The laughter and mocking filled the air before she even arrived. When she stepped off the bus that had dropped her at the main junction, the teasing grew louder. Children giggled, pointing at her simple bag, while adults shook their heads in pity. "So many years gone, yet she comes back with nothing," her cousins muttered. She felt their stares like heavy stones on her shoulders. Her heart ached, but she did not argue. She only smiled softly, hiding the truth that soon their words would choke in their throats. She walked with quiet steps toward the village center, where the crowd had gathered. Suddenly, the sound of an engine echoed down the road. Heads turned. A sleek, shining car rolled slowly into the village. Its polished body reflected the sun, its tires crushed the dust beneath, and the whole village fell silent. No one could believe such a luxury car would enter their humble street. Then came the shock. She stopped walking, stepped aside, and with calm confidence, pulled out a key from her bag. The car lights flashed as she pressed the button. Gasps filled the air. The same woman they mocked as poor and forgotten was the proud owner of that beautiful car. Her cousins froze in shame. Neighbors who had laughed just moments before stood speechless. Even the children who had mocked her now ran forward, cheering and clapping in excitement. The air, once filled with insults, was now full of awe. She walked to the driver's seat, her smile bright and her eyes full of tears. Tears not of pain, but of victory. She remembered the years she worked silently in the city, struggling, saving, and sacrificing to build her own success. Nobody had believed in her, but now her hard work spoke louder than words. When she started the engine, the roar silenced the gossip completely. Some people rushed forward to congratulate her. Others tried to hide their embarrassment, and her relatives could only stare, wishing they had treated her differently. That day in Kampala, the girl they called poor returned as the woman they could not ignore. Her car was more than a ride. It was her proof, her pride, and her sweetest revenge. The village that once mocked her now looked at her with admiration, and the story of her return would be remembered for years to come. In Dar es Salaam, the cultural festival was the biggest event of the year. The streets were alive with music, colorful clothes, dancing, and food stalls. Families and friends came together to celebrate, and the air was full of joy. But for her, it was different. The moment she walked into the crowd, some of her relatives began to laugh. They pointed at her simple dress and whispered, "She looks so poor." Others joined in, saying she was useless, that she had achieved nothing in life. Their voices grew louder, and soon even strangers joined the mockery, shaking their heads at her. She stood there with a calm smile, though her heart was heavy. Every word cut her deeply, but she refused to let them see her pain. Instead, she moved quietly through the festival, carrying herself with dignity. She remembered the long nights she had spent working, the sacrifices she had made in silence. She knew the truth, and she knew the time to reveal it was near. As the festival came to an end, people began leaving in groups, still laughing and gossiping. That was when the real surprise appeared. At the edge of the street, parked neatly by the roadside, was a gleaming, brand-new car. The lights reflected the glow of the festival lantern, and the car shone like a star in the night. The crowd turned, curious to see who owned such a beauty. Then she stepped forward. With graceful steps, she pulled out a small key from her bag. She pressed the button, and the car lights flashed, unlocking with a soft beep. The crowd gasped. The same girl they had mocked as useless was the owner of that stunning car. Silence spread quickly. The laughter stopped. The whispers vanished. Everyone stared in shock. Her relatives stood frozen, unable to hide their shame. The cousins who had teased her now looked at the ground. Even the strangers who mocked her earlier clapped nervously, trying to turn their shame into applause. She walked to the driver's side, her head held high, her eyes shining with tears of victory. When she sat inside and started the engine, the roar echoed through the streets louder than the drums of the festival. Children cheered, people clapped, and her enemies stayed silent. That car was not just a vehicle. It was her proof of strength, her gift to herself, her answer to every cruel word. That night in Dar es Salaam, the festival ended with her as the brightest star. She turned humiliation into honor, and the crowd that once mocked her now admired her. The story of her car would be told long after the music faded, reminding everyone that no one is ever truly useless. Their time to shine just hasn't come yet. In Lusaka, the engagement party was filled with music, laughter, and joy. Families came together in bright clothes, carrying gifts and blessings for the couple. But for her, it was not a celebration. From the moment she walked in, her relatives began whispering cruel words. Some laughed openly, saying she was too poor to ever get married. Others mocked her simple dress and whispered that no man would ever want someone like her. Even her cousins joined in, pointing and calling her unmarriageable. She stood quietly in the corner, pretending to smile, though her heart was breaking inside. Every laugh felt like a knife. She wanted to cry, but instead she kept her head high. She reminded herself of her journey, the nights she had worked hard, the sacrifices she had made, the battles she had fought alone. They didn't know her story, and they didn't know the surprise she had in store. As the party went on, the insults grew louder. While the couple exchanged rings, someone joked loudly that she should learn from them because she would never stand at the altar herself. The hall erupted in laughter, and her cheeks burned with shame. Still, she stayed calm, waiting for the right moment. When the party ended and people began stepping outside, a sight stopped them in their tracks. Parked at the front was a sleek, shining car, glowing under the evening lights. The body sparkled like glass, the tires were spotless, and the interior gleamed through the windows. Guests crowded around, wondering which wealthy guest had brought such a car. Then she walked forward, slowly but confidently. From her small purse, she pulled out the keys. With one press, the lights flashed and the car beeped. Gasps filled the air. The same woman they had mocked as poor and unmarriageable was the proud owner of that luxury car. Silence fell over the crowd. Her relatives stared in disbelief. The cousins who had laughed at her now hid their faces in shame. Even the aunties who had gossiped all evening stood frozen, unable to speak. Meanwhile, other guests began clapping and congratulating her warmly, praising her strength and success. She opened the driver's door, her eyes full of tears, not of sadness but of victory. She sat inside proudly, remembering how far she had come. That car was not just a machine. It was her story, her proof, her crown. It was the result of her own hard work and determination, something no one could take away from her. When she started the engine, the powerful sound silenced the entire crowd. She drove away slowly, her head high, leaving behind the same people who once mocked her. That evening in Lusaka, at an engagement party meant to shame her, she turned the tables. The girl they called poor left as the woman everyone admired, and her car became the symbol of her sweetest triumph.